the sun over redemption, Texas had no mercy. It beat down on the main street like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dust to copper and the air to something you could almost chew. It was the kind of heat that made men cruel and women silent. Nala had learned to be silent a long time ago. She stood on the wooden platform outside Haggerty's trading post with her wrists bound in front of her by a rope so old and stiff it had turned black. She was barefoot. Her dress, if you could call it that, was a piece of flower sacking tied at the waist with twine. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. She kept her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the crowd, somewhere past the rooftops, somewhere past all of it, because if she looked at the men below her, she would have to see what was in their eyes, and she had already seen enough of that to last 3 lifetimes. She was Apache. She was 23 years old, and she was being sold for $40. Fine, strong worker, Haggerty was saying. He was a small man who smelled of tobacco and something sourer. He walked around her as he spoke, gesturing at her the way you gesture at a horse. Good back, good hands. Don't speak much English, but she understands enough. Won't give you trouble. Won't give you trouble. The words settled over Nala like a second skin, one she had been forced to wear so long she sometimes forgot it wasn't her own. She had given plenty of trouble once. She had fought and screamed and tried to run. She had bitten a man's hand clear to the bone outside of El Paso. She had thrown a bucket of boiling water at a rancher in New Mexico. She had been sold 3 times because of it, each time to someone with a shorter temper and a longer memory for punishment. She had learned, not because she believed they had broken her, she would not give them that, but because she was tired, bone-deep, soul-deep tired, and because somewhere inside her the smallest, most stubborn part of her was still calculating, still waiting, still watching for the door that would eventually open. The crowd below was the usual assortment of hard-faced men with sun-cracked lips and eyes that did arithmetic instead of seeing. Ranchers, farmers, a few gamblers who'd wandered out of the saloon to see what the commotion was. Nobody she wanted to go home with, nobody who would be kind. She had stopped expecting kindness. Then she heard them. "Papa, look." The voice was small, piping. A child's voice, and what surprised Nala was not the words but the tone. It was not the excited, pointing tone of a child who had spotted something fascinating like a 2-headed calf or a dancing bear. It was softer than that, worried, almost wondering. Against her better judgment, Nala looked. There were 2 of them standing at the edge of the crowd. Girls. The older one looked about 9. With red-brown braids and a serious face that seemed to carry more years than her body had yet managed. The younger one was maybe 6, gap-toothed and round-cheeked, holding her sister's hand so tight her knuckles had gone white. They were both staring up at Nala with enormous eyes, not the calculating eyes of the men around them, not curious eyes exactly, something else, something that made Nala's chest do something complicated and unwanted. The man beside them was tall, rangy, broad-shouldered in a way that came from actual work rather than posturing. He wore a plain canvas shirt, trail-worn boots, and a hat so battered it had lost any original shape and just sort of lived on his head now out of mutual agreement. His face was all angles, sharp jaw, sunburned cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile but remembered the shape. He was maybe 35, maybe older. It was hard to tell with men who'd lived outside. He was not looking at Nala, he was looking at his daughters. "Don't stare," he said quietly. His voice was low, roughened by the same sun that had creased the corners of his eyes. "She's tied up, Papa," the older girl said. There was an accusation in it. "I know, Elsa." Elsa stopped, reconsidered. "She looks like she needs water." The man, her father, finally looked up at the platform. His eyes met Nala's for just a moment. Gray eyes, tired eyes, the kind that had seen enough bad things that they'd stopped being shocked and were now just quietly, perpetually sad. He looked away first. $40, Haggerty was calling. Who will start me at 40? His name was Cal Merritt. He had not come to Redemption to buy anyone. He had come to buy flour, 2 pounds of coffee, some nails, and if Bauer's store had restocked, a new axle pin for the wagon. He had not come for this. And yet, he stood at the edge of the crowd with Elsa's hand in his left and little Me's in his right, and he watched Haggerty walk circles around a woman who stared at something in the middle distance with the particular stillness of a person who has learned that fighting costs more than it wins. $22, said a voice inside him. That's what you have left until September. The bid had reached 30. Me tugged at his hand. He looked down. She was looking up at him with her mother's eyes wide and brown and impossible to refuse, and she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. His wife, Clara, had been dead 14 months. Fever. Fast and total, the way fever sometimes was, leaving no room for arguments or goodbyes. She had been here 1 week and gone the next, and he had buried her on the hill behind the ranch with Elsa holding one hand and me the other, and all three of them too stunned to cry properly, which meant the crying had come later, separately in the nights, which was worse. He had managed, he was a man who managed, but the girls needed. 35 called a voice he recognized. Denton, the man who ran the river camp south of town. Nala's gaze flickered toward the voice and then went carefully, deliberately blank again, and Cal Merritt saw it, that one flicker, and knew what it meant. She knew that name. She knew what it meant if Denton won. 40, Cal said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out flat and quiet, the way words do when they bypass the thinking part of a man and travel straight from somewhere else. The crowd shifted. Haggerty's eyes found him. 40 from the Merritt boy. Do I hear 45? Denton turned to look at him. Cal looked back. Denton had 40 pounds on him and a reputation that preceded him like a smell. Cal didn't move. Denton spat in the dirt and walked away. Sold, said Haggerty. $40. Cal Merritt closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them and went to pay for something he couldn't afford and hadn't planned for, because his daughters were watching, and he was not willing to let them see what Denton would have done. He told himself that was the only reason. They cut the rope at her wrists. Nala stood on the platform for a moment, rubbing the raw skin, and watched the tall man count out his money to Haggerty with the careful movements of someone for whom each bill cost something real. His daughter stood behind him. The little one, Me, was watching Nala with her head tilted slightly to one side, like a bird trying to understand something. Haggerty handed Cal a piece of paper, bill of sale. Nala had seen a few of those by now. She did not look at it. Cal turned to her. Up close he was taller than she'd thought, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many nights lying awake doing the math on things that didn't add up. He held his hat in his hands and turned it once around its brim, which seemed to be something he did when he didn't know what to say. I'm Cal Merritt, he said finally. I have a ranch about 6 miles north. It's not much. He paused. I don't expect, he stopped again, started over. My girls need someone to look after them while I work, cooking, some housekeeping, that's all I need. You'll have your own room, you'll eat what we eat. He said it like he was reading from a list of things a decent person would say, checking them off carefully. I won't hurt you. Nala looked at him for a long moment. She had heard words like these before, in various arrangements. She had learned to weigh them not by what they promised, but by the eyes of the person saying them. His eyes were tired and honest and quietly ashamed. Ashamed of the bill of sale in his shirt pocket, she thought. Ashamed of the whole transaction, even though he'd been the best outcome available. She said nothing. She nodded once. Me immediately reached up and took her hand. Nala went very still. The child's fingers were small and warm and completely trusting, the grip of someone who had not yet learned that trust was a thing you rationed. Nala looked down at her. Me looked up, gap-toothed and solemn. You can sit up front with me and Papa, Me said, as if this settled everything. The wagon road north was rough and beautiful in equal measure. Red rock country, cedar and sage. The sky that particular shade of blue that only existed out here, so deep it was almost violent. Nala sat in the wagon bed with Elsa, because in the end me had fallen asleep against her father's arm before they'd cleared the edge of town, and moving her would have woken her. Elsa sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, and looked at Nala with those serious eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. Nala considered. People had called her various things over the years, none of them her own. "Nala," she said. Her voice came out rough from disuse. Elsa repeated it carefully. "Is that Apache?" Nala looked at her. The child said it without flinching, without the performance of discomfort that adults usually managed around the word. Just a question, offered plainly. "Yes," Nala said. Elsa nodded like this was good information to have. Then, "Our mother died." "I know," Nala said. She hadn't known exactly, but she had understood. "Papa doesn't cry where we can see," Elsa said, "but I hear him sometimes, at night." She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Me doesn't know, she thinks he just has a cough." Nala said nothing. The wagon rocked over a rut and they both swayed with it. "I tried to make the biscuits," Elsa said. "Last month they came out like rocks. Papa ate 3 of them without saying anything." She paused. "I think he was being polite." Despite everything, despite 14 months of learning not to, Nala felt the corner of her mouth move. Not quite a smile. The memory of one, maybe. Elsa saw it. Something in her face relaxed, almost imperceptibly. "Can you cook?" she asked. "Yes," Nala said. Elsa exhaled like she'd been holding that breath since Clara Merritt died. "Good," she said. "That's good." The ranch was exactly what Cal had said. Not much. A main house of rough-cut timber that had weathered to silver gray. A barn in better repair than the house, which told you something about the man's priorities, and not in a bad way. A kitchen garden that had been optimistic in spring and was losing the argument with August. A dog, enormous and orange, who came bounding out of nowhere and nearly knocked me down with enthusiasm before remembering himself and sitting, trembling with suppressed delight, while me laughed. "That's Biscuit," me said, having woken somewhere on the last mile and recovered her energy completely. "He's not smart, but he loves everybody." Nala looked at the house. The house looked back. It was the kind of place that had once had a woman's hand in it. She could see the evidence in the faded curtains, the clay pot by the door that had held flowers not so long ago and now held only cracked soil, and had been slowly losing that quality for over a year. Cal came around from unhitching the horses. He stopped a few feet away and looked at her looking at the house, and she thought she saw him see what she saw. "Kitchen's through there," he said. "Your room is off the back, small." Another pause. "I'll get your things." She did not tell him she had no things. He knew. He was just giving them both something to do with the next moment. She walked inside. The kitchen was dim and honest, stone floor and heavy table and a cast-iron stove she recognized as a good one, better than the house suggested. Copper pots hung from a beam, polished, which meant Clara had loved them. Dried herbs in bundles that had gone dusty. A crock of flour. A half-used tin of lard. Nala stood in the middle of it and felt something she hadn't felt in, she couldn't count how long. Not safety, not yet. Not comfort, but possibility. The quiet, terrifying idea that this might be a place where something other than survival was possible. She pushed it down. She was good at that. She opened the flour crock and started counting what she had to work with. She made cornbread and beans with the salt pork she found wrapped in cloth in the cool box, and she found dried chilies hung behind the door that someone had forgotten about. And she used them, which was perhaps a risk, but she used them anyway because food without heat was just fuel, and she was not willing to cook fuel. Cal came in from the barn as the light turned amber and stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. Me was already at the table, having appointed herself Nala's assistant, and contributed primarily by handing Nala things Nala had not asked for, and eating approximately a third of the cornbread batter before it went into the pan. He looked at the stove, at the pot, at the table, which had been set with the dishes she'd found in the cupboard, plain blue and white things that had a chip here and there, but were good solid crockery. "You didn't have to do all this tonight," he said. "I know," Nala said. She put the cornbread on the table. Elsa materialized from somewhere and sat down with a studied casualness that didn't quite hide how hungry she was. Me had already picked up her fork. Cal washed his hands at the basin and sat. He looked at the food. Then he looked at Nala, who was moving to take her meal to the small room off the back. The room he'd said was hers, which turned out to contain a cot, a window, and a hook on the wall, and was the most private space she'd occupied in over 2 years. "Sit down," he said. She stopped. "Eat with us," he said. Not a command. More like someone reading that list again, things a decent person would do and making sure he got them right. She sat, across from him, at the corner of the table, which felt like a careful choice for everyone. Me served herself beans with enormous concentration and then looked at Nala. "Will you say something in Apache?" she asked. "Me," Elsa said. "I just want to hear what it sounds like." Nala considered. Then quietly she said, "Enju, it is good, the thing you said before eating when you were grateful." Me's face went radiant. "What does it mean?" "It is good," Nala said. "You say it before you eat, when you are grateful." Me immediately repeated it, mangling it cheerfully, then looked at her father. "Papa, say it." Cal tried. He mangled it differently but with visible sincerity. Me burst out laughing. Even Elsa smiled. Nala looked down at her plate to hide what her face was doing. She ate. The food was good. She had made it good on purpose, deliberately, because she understood that this was the first negotiation and she intended to win it. But sitting at this table in this lamplight with these 2 children laughing at their father's pronunciation, and the big orange dog pressing his nose hopefully against the door crack, she felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was clenched. She did not trust it, but she felt it. Cal couldn't sleep. This was not new. He hadn't slept well in 14 months. But tonight it was a different kind of wakefulness, not grief-heavy, just thinking, which was almost a relief. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and thought about $40 and what it had bought, and whether he'd done right by anyone involved, including himself. He had not bought her to be kind. He needed to be honest with himself about that. He had bought her because Denton would have bought her otherwise, and because his daughters were motherless, and he was one man trying to run 400 acres and raise 2 girls who deserved better than burned biscuits and a father who went quiet for long stretches and couldn't explain why. But she'd made cornbread with chilies and called the food good in her language, and Me had laughed like she hadn't laughed in months, and Elsa had eaten 2 full helpings, and for a moment looked like a 9-year-old instead of a small, tired woman. So, he heard a sound from the back of the house, soft. He lay still, listening. It took him a moment to place it, the back door, opening and closing quietly. He got up, pulled on his boots, and went to look. She was in the kitchen garden, just standing in it, looking up. The stars over this part of Texas on a clear night were something that still got him, even after 35 years, and tonight they were particularly extravagant, brilliant, and thick from horizon to horizon, the kind of sky that made you feel simultaneously small and clarified. She was standing with her face tilted up to them, and her arms loose at her sides, and she looked, for the first time since he'd seen her on that platform, like herself, whatever that was. Like something had put itself back into her when no one was watching. He almost went back inside. He should have gone back inside. He didn't. He came and stood a few feet from her, not too close, and looked up. After a while she said, without looking at him, "My mother taught me the stars." He said nothing, waited. "She said they were the fires of our ancestors, that they watched." She paused. "I used to think that was a children's story. I don't anymore." Cal looked up at the fires of her ancestors and thought about Clara, and about his own mother, and about all the watching that might or might not be happening up there. My wife used to come out here at night, he said the house got too small. It was the most he'd said about Clara to anyone since the funeral. Nala lowered her gaze from the sky and looked at him sideways, not with pity, with the recognition of someone who knew what it cost to say a thing like that. She had good taste, Nala said. Cal let out a breath that was almost a laugh, not quite, the shape of one. Yeah, he said, she did. They stood in the garden for a while, not talking, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. Then the dog found them and inserted himself between them with great emotional urgency, and the moment, whatever it had been, dissolved into the ordinary. Cal went back to bed. He slept. 3 days passed. Nala cooked. She cleaned the kitchen properly for the first time in what she suspected was over a year, pulling everything out of the cupboards, washing the shelves, finding a mouse nest behind the flower crock that she removed without comment. She revived the kitchen garden by the simple act of watering it every morning and pulling the weeds that were strangling the beans and the squash. She braided Me's hair every morning because Me presented herself for this service from the second day onward as if it had always been the arrangement. She taught Elsa how to make proper biscuits and did not mention that it had taken her years to learn herself. She did not speak much, but she listened. She was very good at listening. She learned things. She learned that Cal went quiet when he was worried and loud, or his version of loud, which was 2 sentences instead of 1, when he was relieved. She learned that Me was afraid of the dark and slept with a candle stub burned to nothing and that nobody had addressed this. She learned that Elsa kept a journal under her mattress and took it out at night and wrote in it with enormous seriousness, and that she had been doing this since her mother died, and that Cal didn't know. She learned that the ranch was in more trouble than it looked. She overheard enough fragments of muttering over the account books, the way Cal counted his coffee each morning as if it were currency, to understand that $40 had been close to everything, that a hard winter or a bad season could finish what the good years hadn't started. She did not let on that she'd understood. She filed it away with the other things she was assembling, the complete picture of this place and these people, because understanding a place was survival, and she had been surviving for a long time. On the 4th morning, she was kneading bread when Cal came in from the early chores and stopped. "Your wrists," he said. She looked down. The rope marks had faded but not gone, red-brown stripes, one on each wrist that showed against her skin. She had not thought about them. Or she had thought about them the way you thought about old scars. They were there, they were hers, they were not the point. "It's nothing," she said and went back to the bread. He was quiet for a long moment. She could feel him standing in the doorway, working something out. "I have salve," he said, "for the horses, helps with rope burns. He stopped. If you want it." She kept kneading. "All right," she said. He brought the tin and set it on the table beside her. He didn't offer to apply it. He didn't make it a moment. He just left it there and went to pour his coffee. She used it later, alone in her room, and sat with her hands in her lap afterward and thought about the geometry of small kindnesses, how they came in angles you didn't expect, and how after long enough without them you lost the ability to receive them gracefully and had to practice again from nothing. She was practicing. Me found her in the garden that afternoon. "Nala," Me said. She sat down in the dirt without ceremony, heedless of her dress, in the way of children who have not yet been taught to worry about such things. "Are you going to stay?" Nala kept her hands in the soil. "I don't know," she said. It was the truth. "I want you to stay," Me said. "Elsa does too. She won't say it because she doesn't say things, but I know because she wrote it in her book." Nala looked at her. "I wasn't snooping," Me said, with the energy of someone who had absolutely been snooping. "I just looked once." Despite herself, what did it say? Me scrunched her face, remembering. She wrote, The woman Nala is very competent and I think she might be good. I hope Papa doesn't do something to make her leave." She delivered this with the perfect recall of someone who had memorized it, then added, "Elsa uses big words." Nala sat back on her heels. The sun was warm on her shoulders. The bean plants were looking better than they had on Monday. "I hope Papa doesn't do something to make her leave." She thought about the rope salve left on the table without a word, about "eat with us," about a man trying very carefully to get the words right from a list he was making up as he went. She thought about Me's hand in hers at the auction block, the unthinking, total trust of it. She thought about stars and fires and watching. "I'm not planning to leave," she said, which was the most honest thing she'd said out loud in longer than she could remember, and terrifying for exactly that reason. Me's whole face became sunshine. She threw her arms around Nala's neck with the force of a small, determined avalanche. Nala sat very still for one moment. Then, carefully, like someone remembering how, she put her arms around the child and held on. The garden was warm. The dog was sleeping in a patch of shade by the fence. Somewhere across the yard she could hear Elsa practicing the biscuit recipe and the faint sound of something going right. Nala closed her eyes. "Enju," she thought. "It is good."